Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to look at the standard best of 3 traditional standard ladder Diamond Mythic rank, seeing what the best decks are, what the meta decks are, the tier 1 decks. If you're looking for standard best of 1, video was out yesterday, so it'll already be up on YouTube for the week. If you're looking for off meta decks, trying out a new segment, I put it out on Friday, kind of scouring the internet, trying to find your non-Vivi portion of the metagame. So try to get those out weekly. Folks are asking for best of 1 as well. It's a little harder because we don't have tournaments and stuff like that with RCQ season, but I'll keep an eye out. If I see stuff, I'll include it in the video for best of 1, at least for the interim, unless we can get a big enough sampling. If it's only one deck, I don't want to put a video out just for one deck. But we are going to look at the metagame distribution from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen. So if you want to use Untapped to track your win rates, see stats, stuff like that, link for Untapped is in the video description. All the deck lists that we feature today will be pasted and timestamped in the video description as well, so you can copy paste. While you're there, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're like 1,400 away from 20,000. It's free to sub here, helps out the channel, likes, comments, all that jazz. We got the pitch out of the way. Let's jump into the content now. So Diamond Mythic rank, Vivi most played deck, 16%. We have Dimir Mid, Temur Battlecrier, Azorius Control, Pixie, Mono Black Demons, Jeskai kind of following it up. We're going to look at a 55% game cap in terms of decks I'm featuring today. So if it's under 55%, it's not in here. I will say the Vivi Prowess version of the deck compared to the Cauldron, doing much, much worse. It's like 51% win rate compared to the Cauldron version. So it's not going to be featured here, but in case people are wondering, just to kind of see the jump in terms of Mythic. When you go to Mythic, Vivi is closer to 20% of the meta, so we're seeing a tighter kind of congregation towards the top in terms of metagame, where even if you drop it down, you see it kind of open up a little, but like Vivi is still kind of, as you progress, just more and more towards the top of the metagame. Looking at the distribution, August 10th through today, which is the 17th Diamond Mythic rank, 36,000 games played. Well, what about if the most played deck was also the highest win rate deck? Even looking at MTGO challenges, it's littered with Vivi decks. The kind of latest adaptation of the decks are including some number of Quantum Riddlers in the deck. This one is playing 2 copies for a 5-mana Sphinx. I thought this was a dragon. 4/6. When it enters, you draw a card, and then if you have 1 or fewer cards, if you're to draw 1, you draw that many +1 instead. So it's kind of a card that can cycle early. You can warp it in, and then since it has 4 power, it's only 1 mana to Winter Night Stories back, which is kind of nuts. Just helps you kind of keep the churn going. We're seeing the Riddler over some copies of Tursa, and then we're seeing this particular variant just really kind of adapt for the mirror with 3 copies of a Braid in the main. See 1 Meringue River Regent, so fewer copies of Vivi altogether, and just kind of it's more of an Izzet's Profs deck, kind of interesting of all things, compared to some of the other versions of the deck. No Soulstone Sanctuary in this particular variant as well, but interesting kind of configuration. We see the Vivis in the side, just kind of hanging out here, I guess for like the matchups where they don't have a lot of removal, or they're not really attacking the graveyard. I mean, you don't really need as many Vivis if your opponent's playing Vivis, I guess. Maybe. A null main board, which is kind of an indictment of the format, just being able to hit like Cauldrons, the various enchantments, stuff like that. 3 Flood Maws main, 1 Pierce, 2 Torch, and then the usual offenders in the deck. For kind of going more mid-rangey, you could go with mid-rangey Control. You have Meringue River Region if you want to grind out longer games. You have Raw Crackling Wit for the Control-ish style matchups. Broadside Barrage, 5 damage, draw, discard. Pyroclasm as a sweeper for go-wide decks, along with Fire Magic, negate cheap counters. You have Draconautics Engineers, another combo piece, so if they're playing stuff like The End, or just ways to kind of pick out key pieces, Deadly Cover-Up, you have another way to kind of combo out. With this one here, each of your creatures with counters on it, if you put this under the Cauldron, get the Exhaust ability. You can still only use it once, but basically any of your creatures can now create dragons, so kind of nice play there, and then just more removal, more cheap disruption in Spell Pierce. Temur Battlecrier, 77%. So this deck is built around the namesake card, Temur Battlecrier. So 3 mana Temur, and it's for a 4/3. During your turn, spells cost 1 less for each creature that you have power 4 or greater. So what you're able to do is basically chain together spells for cheap. Outcaster Trailblazers basically replace themselves, and it lets you draw more cards. You have Roaming Thrones, which could be as little as 0 mana. typically you would either name Human or Druid for the Outcaster to draw more cards, generate more mana, or you name Dragon to basically double up the amount of cards you see off Dragonhawk. You give haste with Cactus Folk Sure Shot, and then you have Anti-Causal Vestige here, where you can warp it. The warp gets cost reduced as well, so 4 mana reduced by Battlecrier. This allows you to put more things into play as well. So you kind of get that. Esper Origins kind of helps you keep the deck together. Lumbering Wagon ramps you along with Llanowar Elves. And then there's Devastating Onslaught. With this card here, every 2 creatures with power 4 or more reduces 1 activation of Devastating Onslaught because double X. So you can just make a whole bunch of copies that get haste and you just kind of spam damage through. Bounce off over Flood Moss to protect your own stuff. It could also help you reset, where if you need to, say, get the draws going again, reset your Roaming Throne's name, you can kind of go from there as well. It also works kind of cool where this just cares about leaving the battlefield. So you can bounce it to hand and then get the extra draw and then put something into play, kind of go value there. For the grindier matchups, things with like sweeper stuff, you have Vaultborn Tyrant, draws you cards, leaves bodies behind. Ugin and kind of the mid-range matchups just goes over the top. Ugin gets cost reduced as well. So, Ugin's good, but what if we pay 2 mana for Ugin? That seems a little better. Surik for a lot of targeted removal, draws you cards, enchantment, and artifact hate with Scrap Shooter. Cheap counters, negate, disdainful strokes. You have Spectral Denial, which is basically kind of like a Spell Pierce, but gives you the added upside that if you have creatures 4 or more, it reduces the cost further. Torch, Fire Magic as cheap removal for the Go Wide decks, goes back in for Graveyard Hates. And then Smuggler's Surprise just as an alternate way to kind of cheat things into play. If they're bringing in a lot of removal, stuff like that, you kind of pivot and have that in play. Orzhov Sacrifice, 75%, so pretty good showing on this one here. So it's built around Raise Past. So Raise Past wants to bring back creatures 2 or less from your graveyard, so it's an Aristocrat-style shell. You have Infestation Stage, Nezumi, just things that create bodies when they die. Notably, this version here is not on Snarling Gorehound, which is another way to kind of put cards into your graveyard. You have Servandin, which gets bigger, can be removal. Cool interaction is this just cares about when it dies. If its power is 4 or greater, so you can sack it to Umbral Collar Zealot to basically have instant speed removal. Timeline Color keeps coming back from the graveyard, which is nice for its warp. Vengeful Blood Witch is a Blood Artist effect. Voice Victory makes multiple bodies. And then you have Sephiroth to draw you cards, Blood Artist to your opponent. So you basically have things die through natural progression and then raise them all past, and then Umbral Zealot, sack your board, and then drain your opponent out that way there. Wrath of God for the Go Wide decks, you don't care about your stuff dying because you're naturally going to try to bring it back. Cathar Commando deals with hate pieces that could potentially eat at your graveyard, and just incidental artifact enchantment hate that also is part of the Raise Past package, being 2 CMC. Seam Rip for cheap removal for loaded ground, goes back in for graveyard hate, Eaten Alive, kind of catch-all removal for bigger stuff or planeswalkers, Duress for hand hate against control-ish decks. Dimir Mid, 74%, so this deck here, a little bit different. We're actually seeing Timeline Color in this particular version. Again, just another kind of recursive card that comes back. Deep Cavern Bat, Flood Pit's Drowner, you have Spyglass Siren, 3 Cecils. This version's also playing a Locust Spray, so good kind of cheap removal, but it's got the late game ability just to be another cycle effect for 1 mana. So in the Dimir Mirror, stuff like that, against a turn 1 Mako, it all works, but late game you kind of just cycle it away if you don't need it. Creature Tishana Split in the 3-drop slot, and then this version's doing 3 Curiosity for Kaido. You sometimes see these switch. You sometimes might see Faebloom Trick in here instead of the Preacher. This is kind of the flex spot in there. Your sideboard for the grindier mid-range decks, Dimir decks, stuff like that. Aklazot's in here, Tishana for activated abilities. Lord Skitter when you need some graveyard hate. Strategic Betrayal is really nice against the Vivi decks. Just kind of edict a creature, exile their graveyard, nowhere to run, cheap removal. Then you have just Counterspell Package with the Annuls, Blood Moss, cheap bounce removal, and then graveyard hate and hand hate mixed in. Gruul Landfall. So this deck here basically is mono green Landfall, the Tifa, Mossborn Hydra, Chocobo deck. So this one wants to put lands into play. When the lands come into play, they will allow you to get triggers. So counters, double up the counters on Mossborn, double up power of Tifa. Then Traveling Chocobo will put lands from the top of your library, let you play birds, so some virtual card advantage, double up landfall triggers. Firstly, Bill puts counters, and then you also have Ice Till that lets you play these fetch lands from your graveyard for some added value. You'll notice one mountain in the main board that allows you to go for World Soul's Rage, just a fireball if you ramp enough, and then also brings back a bunch of lands, so kind of dual purpose in that respect. Against decks that have a lot of removal, you could bring in the Island and Dragonback Assault. This allows you to kind of pivot your game plan, and if they're bringing sweepers, well, every land you play now makes dragons. Ice Still Explorer kind of plays in that package, just letting you ramp up. Siege Ship Impact, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Repulsive Mutation as counterspell, and then Magebane Lizard for like the more spell-based decks. Gruul Delirium, 64%. One of my favorite decks in Standard, but fortunately right now it's on the... When your opponents are mainboarding Cauldron, it's a tough place to be in. So this deck here has a build your own Embercleave package. Violent Urge if you have Delirium for more card types in your graveyard. It gives a creature double strike, so there's some creatures that naturally have Trample in Wildfire Wickerfolk, but you overprotect your creature, double strike it, just push through tons of damage. This version here is playing a couple copies of Inti as another way to kind of get some card advantage, as well as Trample. Kind of skimming on the Keen-Eyed Curator. I do like Keen-Eyed. I think it's fairly reasonable in the format, just given that Vivi decks stuff are losing their graveyard. It's also a way to just kind of get a 7/7 Trample in the deck. I do like the split here. Screaming Nemesis I think is very good in the deck. Some of the decks are playing 4 Tursas. I think it's too many. But I would say you probably want the creature land in the mana base at least. The Restless, I forget the name. But you have Bushwhack for fight spells early or late, or mana fixing early. Synod Scout, it lets you explore, can fill your graveyard, gives you something else to do. One thing, if your opponent's on Rest in Peace, board out the Patchwork Beasties. They don't really do much in that matchup. Chandra against graveyard heavy decks, against kind of heavy removal decks, or lockdown style decks. You have Baldur's Strayed Worm, like the new lockdown. Screaming Nemesis for the red based or damage based kind of decks. Overprotect as more protection effects. Obliterating Bolt as removal that hits most, and then notably exiles. Keen-Eyed for graveyard hate, pick your poison. You can do any of the kind of Paw Patch formation, stuff like that. I think I like Paw Patch better because it targets. Fire Magic as just a sweeper, and then Dreadma's Ire is a pump effect that can deal with your opponent's Cauldron. Mono Black Aggro, so 60% on this one here. So this one's a cool one. It is Corpse of the Lost, so it makes you skeletons and then gives your skeletons haste. And then if you descend, permanent goes in your graveyard, you get to bring Corpse of the Lost back to your hand. And then you get to recast it and get more skeletons, kind of go to town like that. Being mono black, you have access to Arc Enemy's Charm. Lets you raise past, or not raise past, like raise dead 2 creatures or planeswalkers. You put counters or exile target creature or planeswalker. You have the Elegy Acolyte, which is a nice top end threat, kind of a Curiosity-esque effect. So whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card and lose a life. What a difference this versus Curiosity. You lose life compared to Curiosity, and Curiosity has no cap. If you attack with 5 creatures, you draw 5 cards. This limits you to 1. So such a difference in those kind of card designs. It also has Void, so if permanent left the battlefield, you get a 2/2 robot in your end step. Sea Souls, you have Forsaken Miners in here that could come back. Tragic Trajectory, Bitter Triumph is removal. Timeline Color could call back. Sunset Saboteur, just an evasive body that's got good power. And then Dark Confidant in here to give you some card advantage. Karsi on Sunset Saboteur sounds sick. Just like 2 mana with this pump for a flyer. Flying Menace, Lifelink, Death Touch seems sweet. For Gisa, I don't really see the point of Gisa in here. You're better off with like Aklazots, I think. Just giving you kind of a stickier top end threat. I think that might be better. You have Leyline of the Void. You can also play, I think with having Dark Confidant in your deck, if you're going to go with Leyline, you're better off either just Strategic Betrayal, more copies, or Ghost Vacuum, I think. Long Goodbye, Feed the Swarms, cheap removal. 0-point Ballad is kind of a sweeper for like low to the ground decks. That could be a reanimation effect. Intimidation Tactics, very good against like the Vivi decks. Hits the artifacts, hits the creatures, exiles. Duress for a cheap hand hate. I think this is the one that I probably wouldn't play this, and then I'd probably switch these because you probably in the grindier matchups do still want your bobs. So boarding into more 4-drops, especially when you don't have the ability to loot, isn't the greatest in that respect. You could also just play Cauldron of your own if you want. Kind of do a split there because then you have creatures that have some utility. Mono black mid-range. So this one here, 60%. So this is your demon package. So you have Bloodletter of Aklazot's Unstoppable Slasher combo that can one-shot your opponent. Demon Wall in here, that'll work with the Unholy Annex to gain and drain. You have Arc Enemy Charm, Cecil, so a lot of the same package, but a little bit more kind of removal. Shoot the Sheriff main, Duress, Tragic Trajectory. You got Soulstone Sanctuary and the Secluded Star Forge as utility lands in your mana base. The End as kind of a catch-all exile removal. You have Scavenger Region as a sweeper that could shuffle back and be a creature later on. Karsi Revenant for the more aggressive decks. Betrayal, like we mentioned. For the mid-range control decks, you have Outrageous Robbery. Stab is cheap removal. Tactics, like we mentioned, Ghost Vacuum, and 1 Duress is cheap hand hate. Esper Pixie. So this deck here will have varied numbers of Cryogen Relic in it, depending on the configuration. This just allows you to draw a card coming in, draw a card coming out with the bounce. You bounce stuff with Pixie. You have Sunpro Kieran and Fear of Isolation that all work. Kaido on the kind of the top end, and then you have Cosmo Grand Zenith. Corey Steel Cutter adjacent effects. Cast 2 spells, you either get tokens or you get counters on your team. So a lot of cheap stuff that you take advantage of, kind of bouncing over and over, momentum breakers, nowhere to run, stuff of that nature. A lot of easy ways to kind of enable Void by picking up stuff and then recasting it. Another Kaido for the grindier matchups, Pinnacle Star Cage for the go wide decks that are low to the ground. Betrayal, again, like we mentioned, good against Vivi, take out the big thing, exile the graveyard. Sheltered by Ghosts. I guess if they only have one thing, it takes out the big thing, just to clarify there. Sheltered is kind of for the aggressive decks, gains you some life. Graveyard Hate, cheap counters. So instead of playing like Spell Pierce or like Negate, you can play No More Lies. Exercise, Artifact Enchantment Hate. For the grindier matchups, you have Relic, Graveyard Hate, and then Annul for Artifact Enchantment Hate. Azorius Control. So this deck here, we got Day of Judgment, Pinnacle Star Cage, no Ultima in this particular variant. You'll sometimes see the Ultimas. Now, notably, there's a non-Bo playing Pinnacle Star Cage and Ultima in the same deck, so it's kind of how you configure it in that respect. Bunch cheap removal, you have card advantage and consult the star charts, and stock up. You're going to win the game with any of the threats on the right-hand side, your Elspeth Storm Slayers, Mistmoors, Meringue River Regents, Hornlock Whales. Then you also have Restless Anchorage and Fountain Port in your mana base. Beza helps keep you alive against the more aggressive decks. The mid-rangey decks helps you stabilize. Activated abilities or triggered abilities, you have Tishana's Tidebinder. Conceals Flankers, Graveyard Hate, Clarion Conquer. Reasonable threat against like Vivi and stuff. Shuts off Cauldron, shuts off the act abilities, stuff like that. In the kind of more flash speed, instant speed matchups, the mirrors, stuff like that. Voice of Victory comes in. Graveyard Hate, Flash Freeze for red and green counters. Exercise, again, just flexible, Artifact Enchantment. Big Thing Hate, Seam Rip for low to the ground stuff. Mono green Stompy. So this one's a cool one. So counters based. You have things like Ouroboros that puts counters on your team. Warden lets your creatures come in and endure, and then you get to put a counter on the creature at end step. Terra Symbiosis can draw you cards. Then you have like Might that gets kind of donates its power, if you would. When it gets tapped, you get to give another creature that equals its power. So if you put a bunch of counters on it, it works out nicely. I think we looked at this deck here. I do think just switching out like Biosynthetic Burst, because you have 10 protection spells here. You have 12 protection spells. But I think you might run into the case of all protection, no pop. So I think cutting the Biosynthetic and then just playing like full pop patch recruit or Hemosymbiotic could be good. I also think just maybe trimming an Osier for like Ouroboros could be good. Warden, again, just if you want to go bigger. Archdruid's Charm, I don't know why this one's in here. It seems the least efficient. You're not really tutoring for any key lands. It's usually played in stuff like Lotus and Pioneer and stuff to help you find those key lands. Wear Down is just a kind of pop patch formation style effect. Ooze for Graveyard Hate along with Soul Guide. Royal Treatment, just more protection. They do not want to die to targeted removal, and then the opponent plays nowhere to run. But Other things you can play is like Surak in here. When you get targeted, you get to draw cards. Like I said, the Arboroid. There's a few like options. I think like Paw Patch Formation is fine. Surak, like I said, would be reasonable in those slots as well. We have Jeskai Artifacts. So this one here, 56%, built around Simulacrum Synthesizer. So this cares about artifacts 3 CMC or more coming into play. It doesn't matter how you cast them, how they come in. And then you make constructs. You also have Repurposing Bay that lets you sack artifacts and then go find artifacts up the chain. One more. This version's playing Pinnacle Emissary, which is popping off in Modern. A bit of Legacy as well. You most of the time will try to warp it. Obviously not as impactful in this format compared to other formats like Modern, where you have all the mocks, so 0 mana artifacts that let you then kind of go off. But even its warp cost still sees a 3 CMC come into play, so Simulacrum Synthesizer comes in. So you get kind of the value there. You have Halia as a card advantage engine when you're gaining life. You have Aegis, Pearly Snare as ways to kind of find specific removal options, relics, fabrication foundries, Legion extruders. A little bit different build configuration. You have Fire Crystal to haste out all your stuff, and then one more up the chain. Riptide Gearhulk. Now notably you would have to sack your Fire Crystal to go here. You'll sometimes see Solemn Simulacrum as the bridge piece to kind of go up in that respect. We have Atseli Reclaimer. So I guess this for the aggressive decks. It also doubles up your tokens. Oh no, this one's not that one. This one's the Return a Permanent. So when this creature enters, return target non-creature non-land permanent with mana value X or less from your graveyard, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this card. So against the grindier matchups, if they're blowing stuff up, even the warp cost would bring back your Synthesizer. Tezzeret for the grindier matchups as well can be brought in, and whenever artifacts come into play, lets you start animating, puts counters on it. Go wide decks, you have Star Cage, a lot of targeted removal, Spring-Loaded Saw Blades for cheap removal, Crystal Barricade, anything that's looking to target you. You can play Negates, you can play Disdainful Strokes, you can play Exercise, so Tashana's, Beza's. There's a lot of like options that you can kind of slot into this deck here. Grixis Artifacts. Another cool one here. So another deck built around Repurposing Bay, but this one is playing it with Weapons Manufacturing. So Weapons Manufacturing just sits here for the most part. It doesn't do anything when it comes into play immediately, but whenever a non-token artifact you control enters, you get to create a munitions token, a artifact token that says when this leaves the battlefield, 2 damage to any target. So what you're trying to do is basically play a bunch of artifacts, make a bunch of munitions tokens, and then Repurposing Bay into Phantom Train, which will then allow you to on-demand sacrifice your munition tokens and fireball your opponent, or Rotten Mouth Viper and then sack them and kind of get value there. Enigma Jewel reduces the cost activation of artifacts, or any permanents with activated. So the Collector's Vault is basically free. Your Repurposing Bay is free. Your Legion Extruder is free that you can then kind of chain it together. Kyrogen Relic, like we mentioned, kind of goes up. You have removal and Grimbauble. The Tithing Blade, Tarian's Journal can draw you cards. Gear Drake makes you multiple artifacts. Chainsaw's removal. We have the Warship as another removal option. So kind of a cool list here. Chandra, just kind of for the grindier matchups. Litho Breaking as a sweeper. Bunch of cheap counters. 3 steps. Braid for Vivi decks. Or just catch all removal for like lower the ground stuff. Flood Maws Bounce, and Ghost Vacuum. And then lastly, this one is CGB's Ramp modified by Snarf 1980 that recently got Mythic 11 and 2. This deck here is just like a Simic big mana deck. So Llanowar Elf, you have Wagon in here along with Overlord and Bloodvine Regent. So just trying to get ahead. You're like a Simic Dragon Eldrazi Ramp-esque deck. So try to put a bunch of lands into play, then you play Vestige, Meringue River, you got some Sires or Ugins, kind of your top end effects. So lands into play, play big fatties, some Timmy magic going on. Demolition Field for kind of the creature heavy deck, or like creature land heavy decks or key land decks. Time Stop, you could just exile their turn. Probably a little bit over cost of an option here. Again, probably better things to play than this. Aetherize for the Swarm decks, aggro decks, things pushing a bunch of power into you through attacks. Paw Patch, Heritage Reclamation for Artifact Enchantment Hate. negate cheap counters, mid-rangey control decks, you have Doppelgang, and then Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been liking, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.